International Monetary Fund, IMF, has advised the Nigerian government to sustain ongoing economic reforms for the country to get better and achieve the desired economic growth that will lift the majority of citizens out of poverty. The multilateral institution also urged the federal government to address governance and business regulation bottlenecks to grow the economy at 5 to 8 percentage points annually. IMF resident representative for Nigeria, Dr. Christian Ebeke, gave the advice yesterday in Lagos at the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry LCCI International Business Conference and Expo 2024, Invest Nigeria. In his presentation titled Nigeria Must Stay the Course on Reform Agenda, Ebeke stated that the country was faced with acute policy trade-offs that stemmed from inherited imbalances. He added that Nigeria's outlook was predicated on strong policies since higher and durable growth required macro stability and further reforms. He said IMF believed that Nigeria's economy was currently turning the corner, but warned that the country must sustain the bold reforms. All right, so IMF, Nigeria must sustain bold reforms. Rufai, your take on this story. The reforms, they are indeed bold, controversial in some instances, and we've seen the impact in the last few months on the Nigerian people. Your take on this story.
So, with due respect to the IMF and Chief Ebeke, or Dr. Ebeke, I don't know what reforms he's talking about. I'm at sea. Is it the subsidy removal that we've reversed and we're paying subsidy back in return? Or the floating of the naira, the managed float now that we are back to defending? In fact, there was a story last week that was coming out that despite the Dutch auction system, where the government is, or the CBN is selling at 1,400 or something to the dollar, it's not still abating, it's still about 1,600. And we came in massively to defend in February. So what are those policies, those reforms? Or is it the removal of electricity tariff that has destroyed the state of our manufacturing as we speak today? And many companies are folding up. So I don't know what reforms he's talking about. Will the IMF and Dr. Ebeke lie that subsidy payment has not continued in Nigeria? Or don't their data show them? Did an IMF report reveal the fact that there might be a return to subsidy payments? So I don't know what they are saying in the IMF. You know, Ralph Waldo Emerson said something profound. He said, what you do speaks so loud I can't hear what you say. So that's the conundrum here with the IMF. Other things that he says that I agree with totally. Yes, we need to remove bureaucratic bottlenecks to be able to get growth. The bureaucratic bottleneck as regards policies. And I will touch on two policies. Policies are not totally planned, ill-planned, just like the president didn't plan before he removed subsidy. They are not empirically studied before executed. They are just mentioned and muted so that it becomes political zinger. Just like they talked about the Oronsei report. And I'm sure the president obviously forgot that he was the one championing the Oronsei report, and they even set up a committee to review before he went to mention that he wants to start a livestock ministry. Just like they have also announced this medicament policy that has not taken effect months after. And just like I've announced this waiver that has not taken effect. So if we can remove those regulatory bottlenecks, then we can see light at the end of the tunnel. But other people also spoke. People like Governor Sanwo-Olu talked about rich tourism potential. I think the Minister of Marine and Blue Economy also talked about also the potential in marine. Yes, there are many potentials in Nigeria, but the problem is harnessing those potentials is a problem. One, because we don't have people with the right mind and right thinking. The Japanese have a saying. They say, Yoshina yoi kangai. Good thinking, good products. When you don't think well, you don't get good products. That's it.
Okay, of course. Nigerians traditionally are very skeptical of the IMF and the World Bank, intervention, development, global finance agencies that try to provide policy advice, provide loans, provide, technical expertise for developing countries. And in this particular case, we are seeing that since the assumption of the Bola Ahmed Tinubu administration, both the IMF and the World Bank, they've been very supportive. And what are the policies that Dr. Christian Ebeke, Yorubas have something called Eke. I hope Dr. Christian Ebeke, IMF representative in Nigeria, is not doing Eke. But what can be said categorically is that he's consistent. in terms of how the IMF and the World Bank have continuously responded to policy reforms by the Tinubu administration. Now, the IMF has continually said, look, the removal of subsidy is a good idea. 2, the harmonization of the foreign policy exchange is a good idea. They've always said that. 3, they've also supported the Central Bank of Nigeria under Olayemi Cardoso in terms of some of the steps that the Central Bank under his watch has taken. Where Nigerians are concerned is that what is the implication, what is the effect, what is the impact of these policies on Nigerians? First subsidy removal, first subsidy return has not necessarily favored the ordinary man. There's a dichotomy between the macro level and the micro level. And it was in that regard that Dr. Ibeke, doing a K, was saying, in my view, that there should be a proper alignment. The Nigerian government, despite its recommendation that the reforms should be continued, should bridge the gap between governance and regulations within the economy. He also made that point as some kind of advice. But let us congratulate the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, LCCI, for organizing that event yesterday. It's what the LCCI does on a regular basis to draw attention to opportunities in Nigeria. And yesterday's theme, the theme they have is Invest Nigeria. So I think at the private level, private sector level, that in itself is a good initiative. So they had persons like the representative of the IMF speaking, and they also had other people who made contributions at the event, like Governor of Lagos, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, who talked about infrastructure and attracting investments to Lagos, making Lagos, a desired destination for investment. And also the Minister of Marine and Blue Economy, who was also saying, look, Nigeria is committed to developing our assets. But all of this, investment policies, sound economic policies, as Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala said, will be measured strictly in terms of the benefit that comes to the ordinary people of Nigeria. IMF cannot be praising us, World Bank is praising us, and we don't see the effect in our reality.
All right, so yesterday's speech by the resident representative of IMF in Nigeria at the LCCI conference, I'd like to take one part of that speech, and that was that he said Nigeria should be a large emerging market nation like China, Indonesia, and India. And if you just look at one of the countries, Indonesia, which we've drawn comparison a lot of times on this table as to what worked for them, what lessons can Nigeria learn, especially in the era of an economic boom. For many years, Nigeria has been touted to be the next nation of economic progression and economic prosperity as a result of a number of indices. 1, our population. Number 2, our youth population. 3, the opportunities that abound, and a few other things. And of course, we cannot take away the fact that we've had, successive democracies, at least uninterrupted, for the last 25 years. So just a look at the Indonesian story for a few factors that really worked. Number 1 was leadership. First of all, under President Joko Widodo, that leadership was a hallmark for the development that was experienced by Indonesia. And then that opened up a number of policies that opened up the nation to economic prosperity. Another, perhaps comparison is that Indonesia is the largest economy in Southeast Asia. Nigeria at some point was the largest economy by GDP on the African continent. Population as well, Indonesia has about 240 million people. Nigeria has approximately 200 million people. So you can draw in, some kind of comparison between two nations. Then what then happened? Number 1 was infrastructure. There was a heavy investment in infrastructure. as a last year, they said Nigeria's infrastructure deficit would need about $100 billion to $150 billion spent annually for the next 30 years. In some quarters, it says we have a $2.3 trillion infrastructure deficit. That's one area, if this government is serious about, capitalizing on the potentials of the nation, should face, and that is investment in infrastructure. And this isn't just at federal level, even at state level. And that's why the people must continue to find out what their government is doing for them, especially in the area of investing in infrastructure, and not just investing in things in things that are ephemeral, things that will not last, things that will not benefit the people long term. I like where the Lagos State Governor comes in here, talking about positioning the state as an opportunity for investors to come in. But we've talked a number of times as well about the fact that if you want investors to come in, a number of things must be put in place, and that's why the rule of governance issue was mentioned yesterday during his presentation. We must have less corruption. He cited corruption and the rule of law. I mean, it's great that the president has said that he would respect the rule of law. He said this at the NBA conference day one. But we must not just say that, say it, but we must be able to demonstrate by action that this is how this administration, not only to be perceived, but what they actually do. So whilst Lagos State might be doing all they can to attract investment, if there are some key areas that are not fixed, investors will not come in. So a few incentives, Indonesia gave some fiscal incentives, gave some, breaks to private investors. Look at what's happening with our private investors in Nigeria. Look at the state, the Dangote refinery is a classic example. So these are some of the things that we must look at. Yes, reforms, they're praising the reforms, but there are so many areas that we can actually draw lessons from, which we keep talking about, and hopefully this administration will take forward with that.